Justin Ginnetti from IFRC's International Federation of Red Cross. He's going to talk about multi-hazard risk and impact forecasting system that they have. Hopefully, yep, we can see that.
Thanks very much, Mark. Thanks, Martin, for the really interesting presentation. Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning to all of you. Really excited to be here with you all today. At IFRC, the International Federation for the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, we're really about sort of bridging the gap, as Erin mentioned at the top of the session, from sound science to action on the ground, given that our national societies in 192 countries are there before, during, and after floods occur. So the system that I'm going to talk about a little bit today, we've been building to really enhance our national society's ability to take anticipatory action before a flood occurs, either through disaster risk reduction or climate change adaptation, or for imminent events to take action to mitigate the impacts of those flood events, which are unavoidable. So this is a schematic representation of the module that we're building on our public Go platform, which is that red vertical column there on the right. And the point of it is to make available information about future risks, to prioritize attention and resources, to show information about the modeled impacts of forecast or observed hazards to support disaster preparedness and response, and to present information about past crises and responses to facilitate peer-to-peer learning. And this is a system that we're building not by ourselves, very much not that at all. In fact, we're doing it through a collaboration with a number of partners, some of whom you see there on the left. I think the main takeaway I would like you to retain from these slides is that the module that we're developing, which will launch in about a month or so, is basically presenting curated information from existing or others' risk models or hazard impact models. We're not creating our own models within IFRC, but we're basically building the infrastructure to present this information and to allow for more direct comparison between existing models. And I'll show you a little bit what that looks like in a couple of moments, or talk you through that. And this is to primarily support a number of our own internal use cases, but because this information is all public goods, we're also intending it to support others' work as well. And I'll talk a bit about that more over the next few minutes. Just a quick timeline on where we are with all of this. We started with a concept note back in the beginning of the year, and then we did a number of consultations with our colleagues from headquarters here in Geneva, as well as regional offices and national societies around the world. We did a lot of data mapping and to help sort of build the data pipelines. Then we developed some prototypes over the summer and presented them back to our colleagues. And then we revised those prototypes and began implementing it last month. And right now we are entering into a kind of a user testing mode, incorporating a few last inputs from additional partners, and we're continuing to explore new and additional use cases. So as you see there at sort of the bottom of the screen, we'll be having a soft launch next month with a series of trainings and webinars. And then in December, we're already anticipating adding additional information and releasing an update based on the data that we'll be able to incorporate from additional partners. I think I just pause here to say that if you're interested in participating either in any of the sort of online trainings and webinars, or even part of the user testing that will be taking place toward the very end of this month and the beginning of November, I really encourage you to reach out to me. My contact information is on the last slide, and I'm happy to add you to the list of users who have sort of advanced access to what we're doing. So there are a couple of kinds of information on the module, and as I mentioned, one of them has to do with information about imminent events. So, at a glance, what you'll see on the platform is a global map. Here, it's zoomed into the Philippines, where you'll see different hazard icons for those that have been detected or forecasted. And when you hover over them, you'll see the footprint of the hazard. So here it's a stylized cyclone track across the Philippines. And then when you click on it, you get the estimated impacts associated with that event. So here you see there, again, this is using stylized data, but the number of people exposed and likely to be affected, displaced, and then the amount of building damage and destruction associated with that event. In addition to these absolute values, which are displayed on the left, we're putting this information or these impacts into context. So by associating them with their expected return periods from existing risk models, most notably the GAR from UNDRR or IDMC's disaster displacement risk model. And I should actually, even though we're looking at a forecast cyclone track here, I should pause for a moment and say something about floods. So right now, floods are not built into the beta version, but it's critical that we add them as quickly as possible because floods represent the majority of the disasters to which we respond at IFRC. It also, they affect more people than the other disasters to which we're responding. And in terms of our spending, most of the allocations for financing from our internal funds go to flood response. So it's critically imperative that we build this impact forecasting for floods into this module as quickly as possible. So that's something we're actively working on. So how will this work? So what we're doing is we're having partners generate predictions for standard indicators. And then what we're doing is we're capturing those predictions across these range of indicators for all of the different hazards. And we're then comparing those predictions to observational data on the impacts of those hazards so that we can assess the skill of the forecasts or the impact forecasts in comparison with one another and to measure their improvements over time. And this is really important to help build confidence in the use of the impact forecasts and to facilitate, again, more peer-to-peer learning among the modeling teams. And this is why it's critical that we at IFRC don't build the models ourselves, because we don't want there to be a conflict of interest or even a perception of a conflict of interest between, quote unquote, our model and one of the other models that we're incorporating and displaying the results of on our platform. So here you see a slide or a graphic that I've stolen from a paper on FluSite, which is an initiative run by the US Centers for Disease Control since 2013, where they've asked different modeling teams to predict a couple of key metrics for influenza seasons over the course of the year for every flu season up to the present. And what you can see from this is that this allows for, obviously, as I mentioned, comparison between the different models, but it shows that there's an improvement in the different models over time. And the idea and the reason why I'm showing this is because we're adopting the same approach. We don't know which models yet are the best in terms of the impact forecasts. And therefore, what we want to do is put in place the infrastructure and a process through which we can evaluate all of the different models over time and see if we can stimulate this needed improvement. So the idea is to essentially learn from what's already been achieved in other sectors, in this case, public health, and then bring that into our sector, into the humanitarian development space. The second kind of information that we're featuring on our platform is more seasonal or information about seasonal hydromet hazards. So here the unit of measurement, unit of analysis is the country month. And what you see here on the screen is a map, again, of the Philippines, just as an example. And then you see the calendar across the bottom. And what happens is when you move the slider from one month to the next, the table below will automatically update and present the information about the risk metrics associated with that given hazard for that particular country and for that particular month. And the idea behind this is again using a very consistent methodology to allow our national societies, to allow our colleagues in the regional offices and in headquarters to evaluate the risks across all of the different national societies using a consistent methodology. So we can weigh and compare like for like as we look around the world in any given period of time. And this is primarily used for horizon scanning. As we look ahead over the coming rainy season, what are the likely in South Asia, if it's the monsoon season coming up, what are the likely impacts one might see over the next few months in the various countries. So as I mentioned, one of the use cases for this is really climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. And what we want to do is present the spectrum of risk to help our colleagues in the national societies, as well as the regional offices, to understand the risks, understand what's driving them, and help them take decisions to manage and reduce the risks where possible. So here you see a loss exceedance curve, happens to be for Guatemala, coming from the Global Assessment Report from UNDRR. And it shows the distribution of risk by impact in the return period. And based on what we know about this distribution of risk, there are certain measures that can be taken at different ends of the curve. So for those high impact, low frequency events, that's really driven by exposure to the hazard, and the emphasis is really on strengthening early warning systems and preparing to respond. Whereas at the other end of the spectrum, for the low impact, high frequency events, we know that the risks are driven by vulnerability. And in many cases, there can be improvements, or the risks can be addressed through disaster risk reduction. And in many cases, these are the kinds of events that national societies will have to respond to and to manage on their own. And this slide just gives you at a glance a sense of the distribution of the risk in terms of the economic losses, and the orange part of the stacked bar highlights that much of the risk is not being responded to through international humanitarian assistance. Those additional losses from the national data sets not captured in MDAT are typically those are associated with those events that are high frequency, low intensity, and are like seasonal floods or annual floods, localized landslides, and so forth. And again, given that flooding represents so much of the disasters that are affecting our people in our national societies around the world, it's really imperative that we put in place measures to address those risks and to mitigate them. Here is just, again, the same slide, but explaining the decision kind of space for it. So here are the different financing instruments that are available to help address the different risks across that spectrum. So for those, again, high impact, low frequency events, those are the kinds of events through which the response is usually supported by the UN's SURF. That sort of middle tranche there is going to be responded to from our own funds at IFRC, the Disaster Relief Emergency Fund. And then that big chunk there on the left are those events through which the national societies are going to be dealing with on their own. And we think it's really important that they understand those risks, that they measure those risks so that they can then in turn manage them, since they're there, as I mentioned at the beginning, before, during, and after these events occur. So I'm just going to wrap up with a couple of slides about where we're going in the next few months. So it's basically more information and evidence, and better use of that evidence and information in decision making, and that's generally going to be achieved through more collaboration with partners. So just really quickly, we're going to be incorporating more hazards such as heat stress, wildfires, floods, and epidemics, more impact forecasts, so not just those that I showed you earlier, more forecasts from more partners so that we can we can compare them, more historical data incorporated into this so we can do more trend analyses and do more model calibration, which is critical if we're going to do any climate change scenarios on top of the existing risk models. And we're going to be incorporating more information about potential early actions as the evidence allows. In terms of the use of this information, I think the main thing to take from this slide is that we're really going to understand the different use cases of our colleagues as well as other partners, and then basically revise this platform so that it's more tailored to their use cases. So it's more intuitive, and so that the evidence is as transparent as it needs to be, so that it can be incorporated with confidence into the decision-making processes that we're trying to inform. That's it from me. You see my email address there. If need be, I can put it into the chat. And I really welcome any questions, and thank you very much for your attention.